The quickest way to reveal what kind of person someone really is to give them power in a room where they think nobody important is watching. Nathaniel Reed had spent most of his life being underestimated, not ignored exactly. Worse than that, dismissed. People saw the uniform before they saw the man. They saw the janitor's cart, the gray work gloves, the mop handle in his hand, and decided the rest of the story for themselves. They decided how smart he was. They decided how much respect he deserved. They decided how close he belonged to power. And because Nathaniel was a black man working in one of the whitest executive towers in downtown Chicago, those decisions came quickly. Sometimes they came with polite smiles. Sometimes they came with silence. Sometimes they came with jokes that were only jokes to the people making them. Nathaniel had learned the difference a long time ago. He had also learned something else. People who think you don't matter will often tell the truth in front of you. They will reveal their fear, their arrogance, their corruption, and their cruelty because they do not believe a man pushing a cleaning cart could ever become a witness. But on a cold Thursday morning inside the gleaming marble lobby of Vail Meridian Global, one of the richest CEOs in the city made a mistake that would destroy his career before sunset. He made Nathaniel Reed the target of a public humiliation, and he did it in front of cameras. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy powerful stories about justice, courage, and people rising above prejudice, make sure you subscribe, because this one starts in a lobby and ends with the truth playing on every screen in the building. The headquarters of Vail Meridian Global was the kind of building designed to intimidate people before anyone inside said a word. 48 floors of glass and steel, a lobby lined with polished black stone so reflective it looked like still water, a reception desk that curved like sculpture, silent elevators that opened and closed without sound. White executives moved through the space in tailored coats and expensive shoes, coffee in hand, eyes forward, always appearing as though the building belonged not just to the company, but to them personally. Nathaniel knew every inch of that lobby better than any of them. He knew which marble panels showed fingerprints by 8:30 a.m. He knew which revolving door always stuck in wet weather. He knew which executives dropped paper cups beside the trash can instead of into it. He knew which ones said good morning. That list was short. At 42, Nathaniel worked the morning maintenance shift. He arrived before dawn most days, long before the first investor or consultant swept through those doors. He took pride in his work because he had been raised to do any job with excellence, even if the people benefiting from it never noticed. His mother had taught him that. Dignity, she used to say, doesn't come from the title they give you. It comes from the standard you keep. Nathaniel had held on to that sentence through harder years than this one. He had held on to it when his father died of a stroke after decades of factory work. He had held on to it when student loans buried him before he could finish his engineering degree. He had held on to it when his wife got sick and hospital bills swallowed the savings they had built. He had held on to it through grief, through debt, through the slow collapse of the life he once thought he was supposed to have. Because Nathaniel had not always imagined himself mopping marble floors. At 19, he had been brilliant with machines. At 21, he could take apart a broken motor, find the flaw, rebuild it, and improve it before dinner. At 23, professors had called him gifted. At 24, life had interrupted the future everyone assumed he would have. His wife Lena had needed treatment, real treatment, expensive treatment, immediate treatment. School had become a luxury. Dreams had become math, rent, medicine, debt, groceries, overtime. By the time Lena passed away 3 years later, Nathaniel was no longer a student with promise. He was a widower with bills. He took the work he could get: maintenance, overnight cleaning, building systems, repair crews, anything honest. Years passed, then more years passed, and somewhere along the way, people stopped imagining he had ever been anything else. That was what prejudice did so efficiently. It erased history from a face. It looked at a black man in a uniform and declared that his present condition must be the measure of his mind. Nathaniel never argued with strangers about that. He saved his energy. He listened. He watched. And because he listened and watched, he knew something about Vail Meridian Global that many of its polished executives did not. The building had problems, not cosmetic problems, system problems. Bad relay timing in the power distribution panels, unexplained nighttime voltage dips on the upper executive floors, security access glitches that appeared and disappeared too neatly to be random, and somebody upstairs had been signing off on temporary repairs instead of permanent ones for months. Nathaniel had mentioned it twice through maintenance channels. Nothing happened. Not because he was wrong, because of who was saying it. The CEO of Vale Meridian Global was Harrison Vale. White, 56, handsome in the expensive, silver-haired way wealth sometimes produces. He had the kind of confidence that didn't walk into a room so much as assume ownership of it. He had inherited part of the company from his father, grown the rest aggressively, and turned himself into one of those men business magazines love to photograph with his hands in his pockets and half a smile on his face. Articles called him visionary. Podcasts called him bold. Employees who worked near him, but not for him, called him unpredictable. Employees who worked directly under him had another word: cruel. Not openly, not in any way that would make him easy to expose. Harrison was too practiced for that. He understood modern image management. He donated to museums. He spoke on panels about opportunity. He funded scholarships. He used phrases like inclusive growth and new voices at the table. But in private, and in spaces where he believed power protected him, the mask slipped. Nathaniel had seen it more than once. The way Harrison spoke to black delivery drivers versus white consultants. The way his face cooled when security flagged a black visitor's badge, but waved through a white executive's son with no credentials at all. The way he once joked in the lobby that some people blend into service roles because it's where they're naturally comfortable. He had said it lightly. 3 white men had laughed. Nathaniel had been 15 feet away, changing a trash liner. No one thought the janitor might be listening. No one apologized. That was 6 months before the Thursday everything changed. That Thursday was important to the company. Investor Day. The lobby was full before 8. Assistants hurried through glass doors. Receptionists straightened badges and schedules. Catered coffee carts arrived. Security stood sharper than usual. On the giant digital wall behind reception, the Vale Meridian logo rotated above a welcome message for shareholders, board members, and press. Nathaniel was buffing the edge of the marble near the north elevators when he heard the elevator bank open behind him and the sound changed. Rooms always changed around certain kinds of men. Conversations softened. Postures adjusted. People made space before being asked. Harrison Vale had arrived. He stepped into the lobby surrounded by white executives in dark coats. His chief financial officer, Daniel Mercer, head of operations, Scott Langford, board member Peter Hall, and a pair of investor guests Nathaniel did not recognize. Harrison was already talking. "I'm telling you, if numbers matter, perception matters first," he said, adjusting his cuff. "People invest in control, not just performance." The men around him smiled in agreement. Nathaniel kept working. He had learned the safest way to move around men like that was to appear neither hurried nor visible. He pushed the machine forward, head down, guiding the polisher along the edge of the floor. Harrison stopped walking. "Careful there," he said. The tone was light, but everyone heard it. Nathaniel looked up. "Yes, sir." Harrison glanced at the investors, then back at Nathaniel's machine. "Wouldn't want you scratching a floor that costs more than your car." A few of the men chuckled automatically. Nathaniel felt the familiar heat rise behind his ribs. Not surprise, recognition. He knew this performance. The rich white man making himself bigger by making the black worker smaller. He kept his voice even. "The machine has protective wheels, sir." Harrison smiled the way men smile when they expected discomfort and got composure instead. "Oh," he said, "so we've got an expert." One of the investors laughed. Daniel Mercer smirked. Nathaniel said nothing. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Harrison noticed a folded maintenance report tucked into the top tray of Nathaniel's cart. The corner of the page showed a diagram. Electrical routing notes Nathaniel had sketched before his shift. Harrison reached over, lifted the paper between 2 fingers, and looked at it. "What's this?" he asked. Nathaniel stepped forward immediately. "That's internal maintenance paperwork, sir." Harrison scanned the page and grinned. "Look at this," he said to the others. "Our janitor thinks he's an engineer." More laughter. Louder this time. A receptionist near the desk froze and looked down. Nathaniel felt dozens of eyes in the lobby shift toward him. "I used to study engineering," he said quietly. That only made Harrison laugh harder. "Used to," Harrison repeated. "Well, there it is. Chicago is full of almost stories." He held up the paper. "Tell me, Nathaniel, since you used to study engineering, do you also have thoughts on our building infrastructure? Maybe you should join the board meeting. Give us a lecture between polishing the floor and emptying the trash." The white men around him laughed again because men like them rarely knew how not to. Nathaniel held Harrison's gaze. There was no anger in his face, just restraint. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Actually, I do have concerns about the building infrastructure." That changed the room by half an inch. Just enough. Not enough to stop what came next. Harrison tilted his head. "You're serious?" "Yes, sir." "Go on then," Harrison said. "Let's hear it. This should be good." Nathaniel knew the trap. If he said too much, they would mock him for overstepping. If he said nothing, they would mock him for backing down. Still, he answered. "The power management system on the executive floors has been showing irregular relay delays," he said. "There have been repeated access control glitches after those drops. Temporary patches keep getting approved instead of a full systems review. If you're hosting investors, you may want someone to check whether the security integration is being affected." Silence. Not respectful silence. The kind people use when they are deciding whether something is funny or inconvenient. Scott Langford looked irritated. Daniel Mercer rolled his eyes. And Harrison? Harrison smiled like he had just found a toy. He looked at the investors and spread his hands. "You see," he said, "this is what happens when everybody starts believing every opinion deserves a platform." A sharp laugh from Peter Hall. Then Harrison stepped closer to Nathaniel. "Not enough to touch, enough to diminish. You mop the floor," he said. "You do not diagnose systems, and you definitely do not interrupt executive operations on Investor Day with fantasies you picked up from YouTube." A few people laughed, but not as confidently now. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I filed 2 maintenance alerts," he said. No one responded. Harrison's face hardened. There it was. That tiny moment when a powerful white man no longer found the black man amusing and began to find him threatening. "Did I ask for a report?" Harrison said. "No, sir." "Then why are you still talking?" The lobby went still. Nathaniel heard somebody behind reception inhale. He should have lowered his head. That was the version of the moment everyone expected. The safe version, the familiar version. But grief had already taken from Nathaniel the life he thought he would live. Debt had already taken his youth. Loss had already burned out his fear of embarrassment years ago. So he answered with the last thing men like Harrison expected from someone in his position. The truth. "Because you'd rather laugh at me than check whether I'm right." No one moved. The sentence landed like broken glass. Harrison's expression changed instantly. Not to shame, to fury. "How dare you," he said, voice low. Nathaniel stood still. Harrison turned toward security near the desk. "Remove him from the lobby. Right now." The guard hesitated. "Nathaniel?" the guard said quietly, almost apologetically. Nathaniel nodded once. "I'm going." Harrison wasn't finished. "No," he said. "Escort him. And before he leaves, check his cart." Nathaniel turned back slowly. "Check my cart?" Harrison gave a thin smile. "You heard me." Now everyone understood what was happening. The white CEO had decided humiliation alone was not enough. He was going to add suspicion. He was going to do what racism has always done when challenged by dignity. He was going to imply danger. The guard looked deeply uncomfortable. "Sir, with respect." "Check it," Harrison snapped. The room held its breath. The guard opened the top tray. Gloves, cleaning fluid, paper towels, spare badge clips, tools, nothing. Then the lower compartment. A leather wallet sat inside. Not Nathaniel's. The guard picked it up and frowned. One of the investors immediately patted his coat pocket. "Wait," he said. "That's mine." A murmur moved across the lobby. Nathaniel stared at the wallet. He had never seen it before. Harrison folded his arms. "Well," he said, "that's interesting." Nathaniel felt something cold pass through his whole body, not because he was guilty, because he understood exactly how quickly innocence can lose to appearance when the wrong white man controls the room. That isn't mine, Nathaniel said. Harrison gave a humorless laugh. I'm sure. It isn't. The investor looked confused, more embarrassed than angry. I don't know how that got there. Harrison's face went flat and managerial, as if this were now an unfortunate but necessary procedure. Security, call CPD and pull the lobby footage. Nathaniel looked straight at him. You're doing this because I answered you. Harrison stepped closer. I'm doing this because people need to learn their place. He said it quietly. But the nearest microphone in the lobby, part of the building's integrated event AV system, was already live for investor presentations upstairs. No one noticed. Not yet. Nathaniel heard the sentence. So did the receptionist. So did the guard. So did two assistants near the elevators. And above them, in conference rooms on 6 different floors, the audio crackled faintly through connected systems before cutting again. Still, no one reacted in time. Police were called. Nathaniel was taken to a security office downstairs while the footage was reviewed. And upstairs, Harrison Vale continued toward Investor Day as if he had merely cleaned an inconvenience out of his lobby. In the basement security room, Nathaniel sat alone for 11 minutes that felt like an hour. He had never been arrested, never stolen, never given anyone a reason to question his integrity. And still, sitting under fluorescent light in a windowless room, he felt the old weight black men know too well. That terrible understanding that innocence and safety are not the same thing. His hands were steady because he forced them to be. His heart was not. He thought of Lena, of what she would have said, probably something soft and sharp at the same time. Probably, breathe, Nate. Truth doesn't panic. He breathed. A young white security technician named Evan sat at the monitoring station nearby, pulling archived angles from the lobby cameras. Evan was new, quiet, pale, freckled, maybe 26. Nathaniel had fixed the coffee machine in the security office for him last winter when no one else bothered. Evan looked over once, then again. Finally, he said, almost under his breath, "Mr. Reed, I don't think you did this." Nathaniel gave the smallest nod. "I know." Evan swallowed. The first footage loaded. Wide shot of lobby entrance. Harrison entering with executives. Nathaniel by the north elevators. Cart beside him. No wallet visible. Evan scrubbed forward. They watched Harrison stop. Take the maintenance report. Laugh. Speak. No audio on this angle. Then another camera. Closer. Enough to see faces. Still no clear view inside the cart. Evan pulled a third angle from a ceiling camera over reception. And there it was. Not the theft. The setup. On screen, while Harrison mocked Nathaniel and held up the maintenance paper, Daniel Mercer, the CFO, moved casually behind the cart for less than 2 seconds. His hand dipped, his body blocked by laughter and shifting coats. Then he stepped back into place. A moment later, the wallet was in the lower compartment. Evan froze the frame. Both men stared. Nathaniel felt his pulse slam once against his ribs. Evan whispered, "Oh my God." It had been planted, not by accident, not by confusion, by the CFO, which meant Harrison either knew or had guessed and decided to use it anyway. Evan scrubbed back, then forward, then pulled the same moment from another angle. Clearer this time. Daniel Mercer's hand, the wallet, the cart. No question. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. The room went silent except for the hum of equipment. Evan turned toward him, face pale. "Mr. Reed, this changes everything." Nathaniel looked at the frozen frame, then at the door. Not if the wrong people see it first. Evan understood immediately. Upstairs, Harrison was already halfway through a polished speech about accountability and innovation. If Daniel or Harrison got wind of the footage before it was secured, files could disappear. Systems could go offline. Stories could change. "Can you back it up?" Nathaniel asked. Evan nodded. "Yes." "Can you keep them from killing it?" Evan hesitated. Then he looked at the screens, at the frame, at Nathaniel's face. "I can do better than that," he said. On the 32nd floor, Harrison Vale stood in front of investors, board members, press, and senior staff beneath a massive wall of branded displays. He was in full form again, smooth, controlled, lightly smiling. He had already pivoted away from the lobby incident in his own mind. Men like Harrison survived by rewriting reality quickly. By the time he began his speech, he had likely convinced himself that Nathaniel had forced the situation. That discipline had been necessary. That authority had to be protected. He was speaking about trust. That was the word on the slide behind him. Trust. Our company, Harrison said, is built on transparency, excellence, and the courage to uphold standards. The screens behind him went black. He turned. A few people in the audience shifted. Scott Langford frowned toward the AV booth. Then every display in the room lit up at once. Not with slides, with lobby footage. Harrison's face changed. At first, confusion, then recognition, then fear. The screen showed the lobby wide shot. Harrison entering, Nathaniel working. The room fell silent. Someone in the audience said, "What is this?" Then the audio came on. Crystal clear, Harrison's own voice rolling through the speakers. "Wouldn't want you scratching a floor that costs more than your car." A ripple moved through the room. Then, "Our janitor thinks he's an engineer." The room got stiller. The white executives on stage looked as though the air had changed around them. The video continued. Nathaniel speaking calmly about the building systems. Harrison mocking him. Then the line that emptied whatever remained of Harrison's image in the room. "You mop the floor. You do not diagnose systems." And then, unmistakable, "People need to learn their place." The sound in the room did not erupt all at once. It broke apart. A gasp, a chair scraping, someone whispering, "Jesus Christ." One investor stood. A reporter in the back already had her phone out. Harrison stepped forward, hand raised. "Turn this off." No one moved, because the footage was not only playing in that room. Evan had pushed it through the building-wide display network. Lobby screens, break room screens, conference room monitors, executive office displays, reception panels. Every screen in Vail Meridian Global now showed the same thing. And the footage still wasn't over. It cut to the overhead angle. Daniel Mercer slipping the wallet into Nathaniel's cart. The frame froze, zoomed, advanced, played again. So fast, it almost snapped his composure, and so fast, it almost snapped his composure in half. Daniel had gone completely white. "Cut it!" Harrison shouted. But the system didn't cut, because Evan wasn't done. The final screen appeared, a time-stamped maintenance ticket log, filed by Nathaniel Reed. Twice. Warning of electrical irregularities and security integration faults in executive access systems. Ignored both times. Then one final live audio clip from the lobby system, captured minutes earlier. "Because you'd rather laugh at me than check whether I'm right." Silence. Heavy. Public. Irreversible. In the front row, a board member slowly removed his glasses. A reporter stood up. One of the investors who had laughed in the lobby now looked physically ill. And Harrison Vail, white billionaire, master of narrative, stood in front of his own slogan about trust, while the truth dismantled him in real time. It happened fast after that. Too fast for spin, too public for containment, too well documented for denial. Building security locked down the AV systems and preserved the files. Legal teams began shouting into phones. Several board members demanded an emergency closed session. Chicago police, already en route because of the theft accusation, arrived to find the story reversed before they even stepped off the elevator. Nathaniel was brought upstairs, not in handcuffs, not surrounded by suspicion, escorted with visible care. He stepped into the investor hall still wearing his maintenance uniform, gray shirt slightly wrinkled, ID clipped to his chest, and every face in the room turned toward him. A strange thing happens when prejudice is publicly exposed. The people who participated in it suddenly become desperate to act as though they never understood the rules of the game they were playing. The same white executives who had watched him be mocked now couldn't meet his eyes. The same receptionist who had looked away in fear now looked at him with apology. The same investors who had laughed now appeared shaken by the possibility that their laughter had been evidence. Harrison tried first. Of course he did. He stepped forward, voice carefully controlled. "Mr. Reed, it appears there has been a serious misunderstanding involving members of my staff." Nathaniel looked at him, and Harrison stopped talking, because nothing in Nathaniel's expression invited partnership in the lie. Board member Charles Whitmore, white, 68, old money cold, stepped in before Harrison could recover. "Mr. Vale," he said sharply, "do not speak." That was the first real crack. Daniel Mercer was asked directly whether he had planted the wallet. He denied it. Then footage from the second angle was shown again. He denied it less confidently. Then the board's outside counsel asked whether there was any legitimate explanation for placing a guest's property into an employee's cart during a public accusation. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. That was enough. Police separated him immediately. Harrison tried to frame himself as unaware, tried to position Daniel as a rogue actor. But the room had already heard his voice, his words, his contempt. And then there was the other problem, Nathaniel's maintenance warnings. A white facilities manager was called in. He confirmed the alerts had been filed properly. Another systems engineer was asked to review them on the spot. He did. 10 tense minutes later, with investors milling in frightened knots and reporters already feeding headlines out into the world, the engineer returned with a face that looked worse than anyone wanted to see. Nathaniel had been right. There was a compromised security relay tied to unstable power routing on executive floors, a serious vulnerability, potentially dangerous. An investor day had been staged on top of it. Harrison's humiliation of Nathaniel was no longer just racist cruelty. It was racist cruelty used to silence a valid warning that could have jeopardized the safety and security of everyone in the building. That changed the weight of everything. Now it wasn't just offensive, it was reckless. By evening, the story had spread beyond Chicago. Business channels ran clips of the footage on loop. Headlines wrote themselves. Billionaire CEO caught mocking. Black janitor before planted theft scheme. Exposed investor day collapses. After lobby video reveals public humiliation and possible frame-up. Maintenance workers ignored warning. Uncovers broader systems. Failure at Vale Meridian, social media did what it does best and worst. Clipped the cruelest lines, replayed them endlessly, argued over what had been obvious the whole time, and made millions of strangers witnesses to a moment Nathaniel would rather never have lived through. But for once, the public story was not arranged against him. For once, the cameras had not been used to distort a black man into a threat. They had told the truth, and the truth was devastating. Harrison Vale was forced into an immediate temporary leave by nightfall, which turned into resignation 48 hours later. Daniel Mercer was arrested pending charges related to evidence tampering, false accusation, and obstruction. More investigations followed. Journalists started looking deeper into ignored safety reports, discrimination complaints, internal retaliation, and executive culture inside the company. And then another thing happened. Something Harrison would have considered impossible. People began asking who Nathaniel Reed really was, not because they suddenly discovered humanity, because they were forced to. Nathaniel did not want interviews. Not at first. He wanted quiet. He wanted sleep. He wanted one full day in which nobody looked at him like a symbol. But symbols are made quickly in America, especially when race, class, power, and humiliation collide in public. Reporters found his old university records. Former professors spoke. A retired engineering instructor named Walter Hayes, white 72, precise and emotional in equal measure, told a local paper, "Nathaniel Reed was one of the most naturally gifted systems thinkers I ever taught. Life interrupted his degree. That is not the same thing as ability disappearing." That line spread too. So did another fact. For 9 years, Nathaniel had submitted repair recommendations, efficiency ideas, and systems notes through maintenance channels at multiple jobs. Very few had ever been acted on. When independent experts reviewed some of those archived suggestions, several turned out to be excellent, which raised an uncomfortable question for a lot of white people in executive America. How many brilliant black men had they trained themselves not to hear simply because genius arrived wearing work boots instead of a blazer? Nathaniel finally agreed to one interview. Local, not national. He sat across from a white anchor woman named Claire Donnelly and answered carefully. He did not shout. He did not posture. He did not perform bitterness for the people who seemed to expect it. He spoke plainly. "When Mr. Vale looked at me," Nathaniel said, "he did not see a whole person. He saw a job title, a uniform, and a race. And once people decide what they think you are, they often punish you for reminding them that you're more." Claire asked him whether he hated Harrison. Nathaniel was quiet for a long second. No, he said, but I think men like him build entire worlds out of not having to respect the people standing right in front of them. And eventually that kind of blindness becomes dangerous to everybody. That clip went everywhere. Not because it was loud, because it was true. 3 weeks later, the board of Vail Meridian Global requested a private meeting with Nathaniel. He almost refused. He had no reason to trust them. Many of them had watched the lobby incident unfold without intervening. Many of them had benefited from the culture Harrison built. But one of the few board members who had not laughed that morning, a white woman named Eleanor Price in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and unsentimental, called personally. "We failed you," she said. "I'm not calling to ask you to make us feel better. I'm calling because you were right about the system, and we need help understanding how much else we've been too arrogant to see." Nathaniel almost ended the call there, but then she added, "You should also know the company has uncovered evidence that your previous maintenance reports were repeatedly buried at the executive level." That mattered, not because he needed vindication anymore, because buried reports meant a pattern, and patterns meant danger. He agreed to meet. White faces around the table. Some white faces around the table. Some ashamed, some careful, some merely strategic. Nathaniel entered in a dark blue suit he had not worn in years. It had belonged to better days. He sat at the long table where men like Harrison had once laughed at the idea of him speaking. No one laughed now. Eleanor Price began with an apology, a real one, not the corporate kind. "We allowed a culture to exist here," she said, "in which a black man could be humiliated in our lobby, falsely accused, and ignored when he raised legitimate concerns. That is on this company. No statement will erase it." Nathaniel listened. Then he asked, "Why am I here?" Because he had no interest in becoming their redemption arc. Eleanor answered directly, "Because we need an independent review of every building systems report, every ignored maintenance escalation, and every retaliation complaint filed by service staff over the last 5 years. And because the engineer we brought in to assess the executive floor relay issue asked who first identified the fault. When we told him, he asked why you weren't already running facilities diagnostics somewhere." A small silence followed. Then another board member, Philip Granger, cleared his throat. "We would like to offer you a position," he said. Nathaniel's face did not change. "What kind of position?" "Consulting first," Eleanor said. "Then if you want it, director-level authority over infrastructure risk and systems integrity." Nathaniel almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the distance between that offer and the lobby floor where Harrison had tried to destroy him was so obscene it bordered on surreal. 3 weeks earlier, the white CEO had ordered security to search his cart and implied he was a thief. Now the same building wanted his judgment. That was not justice by itself, but it was a beginning. He did not say yes immediately. "I have conditions," he said. Eleanor nodded once. "Name them." He did. Independent reporting authority. No retaliation protections only on paper. Enforceable ones. A review board that included service staff, not just executives. Scholarship funding for workers whose education had been interrupted. Mandatory bias review and security and management procedures. And one more thing. "The people who keep your buildings running," Nathaniel said, "will not be invisible here anymore. Not maintenance, not food service, not security. If I come in, that ends." Nobody argued, because after public disgrace, even pride sometimes learns to sit down and be quiet. Nathaniel accepted the role a week later, not because the company deserved him, because other people inside it did. The housekeepers, the badge clerks, the black and brown workers who had spent years mastering the art of making themselves small to survive the moods of powerful white men. The ones who thanked him in whispers after the footage aired. The ones who said things like, "What happened to you could have been any of us." The ones who had warnings, insights, intelligence, and talent nobody had ever bothered to honor. Nathaniel went to work, and the deeper he looked, the uglier it got. Buried maintenance tickets, access complaints mysteriously closed without review, disciplinary write-ups for service workers who had spoken out of line after raising safety issues. One black security guard had been denied promotion twice despite better evaluations than white colleagues. A black cafeteria supervisor had documented racially dismissive treatment for over a year and been transferred instead of heard. A pattern emerged, not dramatic enough to make headlines one by one. That was how prejudice protected itself. It lived in accumulation, in small humiliations, ignored warnings, dismissed expertise, deferred promotions, extra scrutiny, automatic suspicion. Nathaniel documented everything, and because he now reported directly to a restructured oversight committee instead of the old executive chain, people could no longer quietly bury his findings. The work was exhausting, necessary, sometimes deeply painful, but for the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something he had not allowed himself to feel. Purpose that looked like the future, not survival, not endurance. Purpose. 6 months later, Vail Meridian Global held another major public event in the same building. Same lobby, same marble, same walls, different atmosphere. No giant cult of personality banners, no hollow slogans about trust. Instead, the company announced a new infrastructure and equity initiative led by Nathaniel Reed. Not as a mascot, not as a powerful story, as an executive with authority. The digital wall in the lobby displayed his name, Nathaniel Reed. Chief Director of Systems Integrity and Workplace Equity. Employees stopped to look at it. Some smiled openly, a few cried. One of the older black custodians who had worked in the building longer than Nathaniel had shook his hand and said, voice unsteady, "I never thought I'd see that up there." Nathaniel understood, because the title mattered less than what it represented. A crack in the old order, a public refusal of the lie that some people were born to clean up the mess while others were born to be heard. Reporters attended again. This time they asked better questions. One asked Nathaniel what he thought when he stood in that lobby now compared to the day Harrison humiliated him. Nathaniel looked around the marble room, at security officers receiving new bias response training, at maintenance leads included in morning systems briefings, at reception staff instructed to escalate every report on merit, not status, at younger workers of color standing a little straighter than they used to. Then he answered, "I think prejudice depends on two things," he said, "silence and hierarchy. It needs people at the bottom to doubt themselves and people at the top to believe they never have to listen. The moment either one of those things breaks, the whole structure starts to crack." The room was quiet. Then someone applauded. Then others joined. Not for performance, for recognition. As for Harrison Vail, he became one of those men who disappear from magazine covers faster than anyone once thought possible. There were investigations, lawsuits, settlements, disgrace statements written by lawyers. He claimed he had been under pressure. He claimed the footage did not reflect his broader values. He claimed he was unaware of Daniel Mercer's actions. Had heard the way he told a black man to had heard the way he told a black man to know his place. And there are some sentences so old, so poisoned by history, that once spoken clearly in public, they expose the whole architecture beneath them. Daniel Mercer eventually took a plea deal. Several other executives quietly resigned. The company changed not out of sudden virtue, but because exposure is expensive and truth had finally become more dangerous than the lie. That too is part of justice sometimes. Not purity, consequence. A year after the incident, Nathaniel visited the community college where he had once dropped out. He had funded, through the New Worker Scholarship Program, a grant for adult students whose education had been interrupted by caregiving, illness, poverty, or family crisis. At the ceremony, a young black student named Malik asked him, "How did you keep going when people looked down on you for so long?" Nathaniel thought about the lobby, about Lena, about years of being seen only in fragments, about the terrible discipline of keeping your dignity in rooms designed to strip it from you. Then he said, "I stopped waiting for disrespectful people to tell me who I was. That's how." Malik nodded slowly. Nathaniel smiled. "And once you know who you are," he added, "their blindness becomes their problem, not your definition." Late one evening, long after most executives had gone home, Nathaniel stood alone in the lobby where it had all begun. The marble shone under warm lights. The revolving doors turned slowly at the street. His reflection looked back at him in the glass, taller somehow than it once had, though his body had not changed. Maybe that was what happens when a man no longer carries other people's assumptions on his shoulders. The receptionist desk had been redesigned. The security protocols rewritten, the screens updated. The culture, while not perfect, no longer rested on fear of speaking upward. He looked at the exact spot where Harrison had stood, the exact place where white laughter had tried to make him smaller, and he understood something clearly. A black janitor could not also be a black janitor, could not also be brilliant. The lie that dignity depends on job title. The lie that power belongs naturally to those who inherit it, and intelligence belongs visibly only to those who wear it in approved costumes. Nathaniel touched the railing beside the elevators and smiled to himself, because in the end, the security footage had done more than expose one racist CEO. It had forced an entire building full of white power to see the man they had trained themselves not to notice. And once they saw him, they could never honestly pretend again that they hadn't.